How do you become an inspirational speaker, a transformative leader, make somewhere the place to be? These answers can only be passed down from one generation to the next through stories. Each story is not a step-by-step guide, but rather delivers the principles for success, or the intangibles. Tiger Tales is a Toastmasters club from Rochester, New York that started 7 years ago. Starting with its founders, this club has produced eloquent orators that have gone on to become this generation of leaders all around the world. Join us in talking with our club's cornerstones, revealing the undefined, the intangibles.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Intangibles podcast. I am Xavier Tarr.
And I am Alex Turner.
Alex, how good was that intro?
That was incredible.
Huge shout out to my friend Ventes Stein for making that such a voice wizard. Alex, why are we here today?
So Xavier got this idea as we were watching from generation to generation of Tiger Tales, this amazing Toastmasters club that had accomplished so many great things, these leaders coming up, and so many of them had not yet even met, or some of them hadn't even heard of what we think of as household names of the club that were there at the beginning that helped make Tiger Tales Toastmasters DNA what it is today. So Toastmasters is an international public speaking organization. There's clubs all over the world, but Tiger Tales is our club, and it is, from all of the clubs that I have visited, entirely unique in the way that we come together and do things. And we wanted to capture some of that uniqueness and to share the people and the stories that made that uniqueness what it was.
Through the last 7 years, this club has grown into something that's very strong, the place to be. And it started because of these people that served as cornerstones to this whole thing. Now we get a chance for everyone to meet them.
Now, speaking of interviews, the first interview that Xavier and I did was actually just Xavier and I. And there's good stuff in it, but it's very serious. I apparently was feeling very serious that day. And I think that this conversation that we're about to share with you is much more representative of the goals that I laid out there in our introduction, that this is so much more about the people that helped get this club started. And we can't start the club without starting with Haleem and the energy and the vision that he brought into it. And so I'm so glad that the first conversation that we're going to share with you is the one that we had with Dr. Haleem Syed.
All of this started because Haleem had a dream, and now we get to go back, figure out who this guy is. It's going to be amazing. So let's dive in. So Haleem, can you tell us how you got into Toastmasters in the first place?
I started at RIT for my undergraduate in electrical engineering. If you've been a part of RIT, which both of you have, you know we have a cooperative program where we get to go on co-ops. One of my summer internships, I was in Syracuse, and I worked for a company called Magna Powertrain. It's an automotive company. Did a really good internship. And at the end of the internship, one of my managers, Stephen Becker, walked up to me in the hallway and he said, Haleem, you did some fantastic work for us this summer. You took something that took us 10 hours and moved it down to 45 minutes. That's great.
Wow.
We're going to bring you back next year. And I've invited all of the upper management to your final presentation tomorrow. And the moment he said that, I started feeling the butterflies of, oh snap, I'm going to have to speak to upper management, a room full of upper management. And all I remember from my final presentation that day is all of the classic symptoms you can describe of phobia of public speaking: sweaty palms, shaky voice. I remember breaking eye contact with my slides for a moment to look at the audience. The big boss was bored out of his mind. My manager wasn't even looking at what's happening in front. He was just, it went disastrous. Later on, internship ended, next year rolls around. I'm like, wow, I have an internship lined up because they were going to bring me back. I called them back up and they're like, oh, we're sorry, we no longer have that internship. I'm sure they have a wall of shame somewhere where they have my name. But that gave me that that realization that, oh, snap, regardless of how well I do technically, if I can't communicate that, it's going to always be a problem. I knew I had to fix this issue of getting better at communication skills, but now it was real. I had this thing in my hands and I lost it just because I couldn't stand up and speak. So I started trying to fix it. When you get on the search, one of the first things hopefully you will find is that Toastmasters as an avenue to help overcome those issues. It was a long process, but that got me to the doorstep for Toastmasters.
It's kind of like this wake-up call happened. You're Googling, how can I become a better public speaker? And then
Right.
Toastmasters came up.
Toastmasters came up. That's not enough, right? Just showing up to the door is certainly the beginning of the story. The second thing that maybe clicked or make me stay, because I'll be honest with you, I was actually, in the beginning, I was ashamed of telling people that I was in Toastmasters, right? It was almost like there's something wrong with me. I don't want to tell people about it. And so it was something I did in secret. And I might relate a little bit to people's internal dialogues, right? When we are unable to do something, we relate it to, oh, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah, it's an experience that I think of too. And sometimes when I tell folks that I'm in Toastmasters, they'll say, oh, that's great for the kinds of people that need it. It's almost like being a part of AA or something else where there's all these great principles that are there. But I definitely related with that experience of
a little bit of maybe a feeling of inadequacy, right? I remember being at one of the meetings. It was a club member. His name was Minister Mark Muhammad, and I was a new Toastmaster, but he was a teacher of public speaking, I think, in Syracuse at some college. And man, when he got up to speak, he would just have the entire room in the palm of his hands, and everyone would be listening. And you could tell he was polished. Not only was he a minister where he would preach, he was also a teacher of public speaking. And I remember walking up to him at the end of the meeting and I said, wow, you're absolutely amazing. That was a great speech. And I am absolutely terrible. I suck. I could never do that. And I was, as normal conversations unfold, I was expecting some empathy and expecting him to say, no, you're not that bad. He said something that threw me for a loop. He said, well, maybe you haven't had a chance to practice. I paused for a second. I'm like, I was not expecting that response. But when I reflected on it, it's correct. When have I actually had a chance to be mentored and trained in this ability to speak? We expect to be born with it, right? So I think those two events, not getting that internship because I couldn't give a presentation, and realizing the fact that really what's behind the ability to speak is proper practice. Then I was sold. Okay, I was like, okay, I'm going to commit to this process and see where it goes. I wasn't, sure if it would lead me somewhere, but that's where the beginning happened.
Yeah, and logically, it makes sense that, like how we go to college to get technically trained, why are we not getting trained in public speaking by someone who's been trained before us?
Correct.
Do you remember your first speech at all, or an early speech that you gave and how that went?
To be honest with you, I have a terrible memory. Because of that, I record all my speeches. And not only because of that, because of terrible memory reasons, but sometimes I felt I wasn't aware enough during the speech to even remember what happened. And that's the case in combat sports. So I have had a chance to wrestle and do judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which are combat sports. And every time I went to competitions, in the heat of the battle, you don't know what happened. Like, you tried to do your best. So I realized recording those matches was a valuable tool for me to go back home later when the dust has settled to watch actually what happened in the fight. And so I started bringing that habit to Toastmasters, where I would recorded all of my early speeches. And I probably have an external hard drive somewhere where all of the speeches are sitting. And on occasion, I've gone back to them and been completely appalled at the speeches I gave, maybe my first 10 speeches. Equally, I was surprised by my evaluators, because I would record my speech and the evaluation that was given to me. I started seeing the incredible value that Toastmasters has in creating some magic, where my evaluators found something good in those horrific speeches. Like, over time, you don't even realize you have this internal shift of realizing that, I can do better, because there are these people repeatedly standing up telling you that you did something well, and they're applauding for you. And that change happens over time. So I don't remember the exact topics of my speeches. I can tell you that they were personal stories sometimes. Sometimes they were things that I was interested in, maybe surface level. They weren't too deep, except the speeches that I came up with for the contest. But most of my club speeches were mostly focused on whatever it is that I was interested in. I don't know, maybe it was competitive mindset in competitions. I would write a speech on that and deliver that, or whatever it is I'm interested in at that time. But they weren't personal. They weren't, as Alex would say, vulnerable, so to speak, because it's a little scary to get there, you know? So you're starting out as a speaker. You also learn, I think, early on that there's topics that are very personal or have to be treated with a certain amount of delicate art. There's an art to it. An untrained individual getting up and speaking about something that is deeply personal can suddenly turn a room into a feeling of uncomfort, right? Discomfort in the room. If you don't know how to manage it, it's just going to be a disaster. So I think I stayed away from those topics. Over time, you know, you evolve and you learn how to bring those subjects up. But yeah, I can't tell you the exact titles of my first speech or first few speeches. I could probably look them up and go back to those videos. Don't ask me for them, because if anyone gets a hold of them, I will personally hunt them down.
Was there a certain evaluator that you remember giving you valuable feedback, but also making you feel encouraged to give your next speech as well?
Yeah, that's an art that not too many people have. There's only a handful of great mentors and evaluators who can really give you that feeling of you did something. They can tell you what you did well as inspire you to do better the next time. My club had actually someone, her name was Maggie Everhart Wegman. Mm-hmm. I knew her because she used to work at the writing center at RIT, and she taught English at some point. Man, this lady had an amazing heart. She could listen to your speech, and maybe you weren't able to find exactly the words to articulate what you're trying to say, but she would hear it. She would hear it and she would say it in the evaluation. You're like, oh my goodness. So she exemplified those abilities to really, really listen to what the person was saying. Later, I would see that pattern in individuals like Corey. Corey's ability. I remember, for those of our listeners, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to meet Corey. He was one of our first very important pillars and mentors for the club. I remember we had this long speechathon where we had icebreaker speeches for what we call the Sabur clan. We had a group of students from Afghanistan who were all like Fulbright scholars, and they all gave their icebreakers. Some of them had incredible stories. You know, of course, many of them were not fully polished as public speakers. And I remember Corey evaluating all of them one after another. Like, he listened to all of their speeches and he came up and he was able to really listen to these individuals and comment on things that were not fully expressed, but were trying to be expressed, right? So my club had Maggie, and I think she's still a member of Toastmasters in Rochester, but incredibly grateful for having her as my mentor.
When you think about that early mentoring, what would you say is the block that you needed to get through to get to where you were, say, when we were competing together that spring, giving polished, really profound speeches?
Now, I wouldn't necessarily characterize my own speeches as profound, but maybe dramatic elements of storytelling and drama definitely there. You know, initially they talk about it takes a tribe. It was never my idea to start competing. You know, you join a club and then the competitions come around. They're like, oh, Haleem, that speech you gave was really good. You should compete with that. So that's how I just went to a humorous contest. And I was actually trying to use it as a humorous speech to start out with. Now, the speech that you're talking about that you and I experienced together at maybe the district contest a couple of years later, for those of you who are listening, Alex and I were at a contest. We met at a division level, and I think both moved on to the district contest for District 65. And I remember we had our division contest in Geneseo. That's the first time I've ever actually seen Alex speak. And I was a member in the audience, and I don't recall if you spoke before me or after me. Very likely you spoke after me, because I don't see speeches until I have spoken, right? I'm always in my head before. So you likely were a later speaker. So I got a chance to listen to it. And I was incredibly impressed and inspired with Alex's speech. He has such an amazing speech about understanding that we have multiple sides to ourselves, right? It was about him being an engineer, and he has the side of him that's a poet. And it rung true personally for me, because I feel a little bit like that. I was like, wow, Alex has won this contest. You know, he's definitely first place. So that was my experience. And I remember Corey was his mentor, and Corey offered to coach me. That's another thing that struck me. Alex and I were competing side by side, and Corey has a incredibly big heart that he didn't really care about competition. He invited me for coffee and helped me with my speech. And that's how I started to get, to know Corey and Alex and all of those people. Now, that speech particularly, this is going to be a long answer, I would say that is not me alone. And that speech, I think, has a history that reflects what happens in the culture of Tiger Tails today. I remember listening to a world champion of public speaking. His name was Darren LaCroix. He, in his interview, said he took his world championship speech to like 20 different clubs. He would gather feedback, specific feedback, by giving that speech at 20 different clubs, tweaking the speech until he got it to the point where he was able to use it for the world championship of public speaking. And I'm like, okay, I'm competing in this contest. Why am I not putting in that amount of work? So I took my very, maybe say, rudimentary speech, which probably won the area contest, and started contacting different clubs in the area. Inevitably, they would say, yeah, we have a speaking spot, come on over. And I made a detailed sheet that I would hand out to everyone and collect that feedback, improve it, and then I would do the same thing next week. So I did that for, I think, about 10, 15 clubs. Whatever I could drive to, I would go there and gather feedback. I got some incredible ideas that took my speech from being an average speech to an amazing speech, which I was surprised myself after listening to. I'm like, holy smokes, these small tweaks coming from a combined intelligence of a community will radically change. Now, if you ask me to make another speech like that, of course, I've learned things through that speech that now I can carry over to the speeches, but it's a difficult task. That's a speech written by the community. You know what I'm saying? It's taking my story, being able to communicate it in a way that resonates with everybody else.
Now,
Yeah.
I've had the chance to hear Alex's past competition speech, but I haven't had the chance to hear yours. So is there a way that you could summarize what you kind of talked about?
I can. It's my experience of joining the RIT wrestling team.
Oh.
And it was something new for me. It's something I had never done before. I was definitely out of my comfort zone. And I think that led to some interesting experiences which are captured that link back to my own, growing up and some heroes in my own life.
And then end of the season, we drove down to Cornell. Now, Cornell has one of the best wrestling teams in the country. So coach was trying to pump us up, right? He gets us all in a circle. He says, Luke, you got a great double leg. These Cornell guys, they got nothing on you. Pick the guy, put him down. You have a great suplex. Grab the guy, put him on his back. And he goes through every person on the team, telling them what they do well, and then he stops at me. There's silence. And then he breaks the silence and says, nobody in RIT has the heart to come into this wrestling room every single day, take a beating, and still show up the next day. They might have more experience than you, but you have the heart. You're going to go out there and show it to them tomorrow. I was pumped up. I showed up. And wouldn't it be nice if I told you I won that fight?
Yeah, I would say competitions especially is one of the ways that you can grow as a public speaker the fastest. Whoever starts out at the beginning of a contest finds that whether they win or lose, they grow so much during that time, especially if you get to go up and iterate on the levels.
Yes, it's a process of speechcraft. It's a process of self-discovery because you're going to be doing some, soul searching to really find your message. So it's an incredible, incredible tool for sure. I would certainly not take those steps alone. It was a result of being part of Toastmasters, people pushing me to compete. And then I happened to hear that Darren LaCroix. And honestly, in that district contest, I think I ended up with second place. Mm-hmm. And I realized I was incredibly nervous. I was still a relatively new speaker. I was nervous. I tried a few things. I didn't know how to take a loss. I was really pissed off. I thought I was supposed to have won. And I remember that district, the speaker was Jim Keys, who was a world champion himself. And I was talking to him after the contest. And I'm like, I can't believe, I spent so much time and energy into this and I deserve first place. Can't believe I lost that. These judges suck. And Jim Keys was like, oh, so you spent the last 3 months like really investing in the speech? I said, yeah. And he said, I've lost the world championships 4 times. And for each of those, I've prepared for a year or more, 4 years. And before he finally broke through and won his final world championships, like imagine what it feels like to invest 4 years and not have anything to show for it. And then he said he realized that from losing the world championship so many times, he started deriving pleasure and value from other aspects other than just winning. So here I was, like, spent 3 months, I was really pissed. It kind of gave me perspective, like just chatting with him at that table there, that, okay, I need some mental corrections. And looking back now, when I look at the recording of that speech from that district contest, I certainly didn't deserve first place. I was terrible. So
I'm sure it wasn't terrible.
Yeah, I don't know about terrible because I was pretty happy to get third behind you after I seen your speech. The winning speech that year.
Dennis Gouda.
Yeah, Dennis Gouda gave that speech, and it was all about his relationship with his mom. And for that audience, that was the best speech because it moved so many people to feel so much. And for two young bucks to get up there and give motivational speeches about this is overcoming, or for me, that we're all brilliant and there's this unlimited potential in the room. All the audience of mostly older folks are looking for a speech that brings them nostalgia, not exciting potential for the rest of their lives. It's a little bit of a different audience. So it's interesting. That's one of the things that I've realized most about, especially district level of competition, knowing your audience. You could give the best speech in the world for a different audience. And if you don't cater it to the folks who are listening to that speech and the judges that are listening, that knowing your audience is a part of what it means to be a great communicator and a great speaker is tailoring it to the audience. And at some point, that's a big piece of it, is knowing how to reach the folks who are judging that speech. And it's going to be different at each contest. I've definitely had my moments of feeling bitter about that, either for myself or for a mentee who gave just barnstorms of speeches, just incredible, emotional, vulnerable, powerful speeches, but it wasn't for that audience.
Right.
And it's a tough lesson to learn to get to be in that spot, because you know that it's the better speech. Sometimes you know that it was a better speech and it was delivered better and it was more powerful. But at the end of the day, you're speaking to judges, and those judges are people. And as much as you want them to be completely objective, part of what they're being objective about is did you reach me as a judge? It's hard.
And that's something we learn about, in Toastmasters. We come to, let's say, overcome our fear of public speaking, but then we learn what it really means. Public speaking is really understanding the public that is listening to you. It's not about you, and being able to resonate with them. Certainly that's a challenge. I remember sometimes, I don't know if you've had this experience where you find a book and it's the most incredible book that you've read, and you're so excited about it, and you buy an extra copy and you share it with your friend, and they turn the page and go, meh. You're like, God damn it. For you, this was, because for you as a person, that book spoke to you. Yeah. And they might not necessarily be in a place where that book speaks to them. So what the idea that Alex is talking about, whether or not an idea really, really resonates with that particular audience is of massive, massive importance.
I hope you guys all enjoyed. Join us for the next episode, where we'll talk with Haleem again about how Tiger Tails all got started. See you next time.